Salutations, everyone. This is Razor giving you guys my personal review on Rogue One, a Star Wars story. I thought it was a good movie. It was a very Star Warsy Star Wars, and not perfect. A lot of people, of course, are going to have extreme views of this movie. One way or another, it's like, oh, this is the best since Empire, or it's the worst since Revenge of the Sith. People are always going to have their crazy opinions, especially when it comes to Star Wars. And I expressed this before Force Awakens came out. You saw my rants on Star Wars fans and how they perceive things and the critical opinions that many people have. But since The Force Awakens and now with Rogue One and, episode 12 and Han Solo and the 56 and, however, from now until the end of Star Wars movies being made, the same exact reactions will be coming about, and you'll see a pattern starting with Force Awakens, going to Rogue One. Mostly, I think people will perceive this to be positive. Most people don't like the prequels. Eventually, most people didn't like the prequels. Most people liked it at the time, or at least the first one, maybe the second one, and by the third, everybody was on the hate bandwagon. And that's really what a lot of this is about. It's about bandwagon hype. It's about or bandwagon dismay. People love to just regurgitate what they hear, and we know that negativity always gets way more press than positivity. But I think most of this movie will be positively received by Star Wars fans, and of course it's going to make $1 billion in the box office. That's just what Star Wars is going to start doing. They have monopolized the month of December, as they have plans to be a yearly Star Wars thing. We have the next episodic movie coming out next year, and then we have the Han Solo movie, and then we'll have the next episodic one, and then whatever comes after that. We know that there were early plans of a Boba Fett movie, but that got trashed after the Fantastic Four thing happened. So, what did I think about Rogue One? I really enjoyed it. It was, the most warlike movie of the Star Wars movies. You really got to see the Rebel Alliance doing what they do without somebody, just becoming the figurehead of it like Luke was, who was, a Jedi. He was powerful. He was on the hero's journey. He was on a path. This strays away from that in both the narrative and the structure of our protagonists that we saw here, even different from what we saw in Force Awakens. Now, a lot of people are going to say this movie was all about fan service and nostalgia, and that's all it had going for it, and therefore it was bad. And then you're going to have some people who are like, no, there wasn't that much fan service. It was just a Star Wars movie. And that's really what it was. I mean, we did have some nods to the original trilogy, when we bumped into those guys from the Cantina from The New Hope. That was really funny. And, we got C-3PO and R2 popped in there, which makes their streak going of being in every single Star Wars movie, although I think that will end when the Han Solo movie comes out, because there's really no reason for 3PO and R2 to be there, especially since they're supposed to be, with the rebels during the time. And Han doesn't seem to have any interest in that previous to A New Hope. And we got to see Red Leader and Gold Leader come back. That was really impressive. Grand Moff Tarkin is going to be a big thing that people are going to be talking about. A lot of people are going to hate the CGI of Grand Moff Tarkin and Princess Leia. And a lot of people are going to appreciate the effort, because it's a double-edged sword. Either because Peter Collins died in 1994, obviously he couldn't be here for this movie, but it makes sense for Grand Moff Tarkin to have the position that he had in this movie. It only makes sense. But if you don't have him in the movie, you have people wait, why isn't he there? He should be, headlining this thing. Obviously, we have our own more centralized antagonist of this movie, even though he's not Vader and he's not Grand Moff Tarkin or the Emperor or someone like that. He's below all of them. But when it comes to this story, it's his story as far as an antagonistic perspective goes, from the very beginning, when he took Jin's dad, to the end when he confronts her on the top of the radio tower and he gets shot by Cassian. So A lot of people are going to shit on the CG just because it's a movie that has special effects, obvious ones, even though pretty much every single movie ever made has special effects. This one is really obvious ones because you're in space and there's spacecraft and lasers. Therefore, a lot of people are going to hate on it just because they hate CG because, oh, it's not practical effects, or, oh, it's a blockbuster, therefore it's going to be garbage and trash. Obviously when it comes to Grand Moff Tarkin, people are going to criticize it because it doesn't look 100% realistic, which is impossible because he's not a real human being. He died, 22 years ago. So, and there are some people like, wow, why didn't they get the guys that did this in this movie or this in this movie? It's the same special effects team. Everyone does. If you think that they didn't get the people who did it in Ant-Man or Benjamin Button, no, they're the best at what they do, and they're the reason that they're the only people who get outsourced for that kind of work. Obviously, you have Industrial Light and Magic, doing what they do. But when it comes to those facial things, there's a company that does that, and everybody uses them for a reason because their previous work is really good. But people would be like, oh, the uncanny valley, oh, it looks super fake, oh, it took me out of the movie, blah 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 blah. It was actually good. Get over yourself for the first part. And second off, if you people would have complained either way. That's one of the things about Star Wars. People are always going to complain about this or that. Now, it wasn't a perfect movie. I didn't think it was as good as The Force Awakens. It didn't need to be. It's not like it should have been or anything like that. It was its own contained story, which is very unique within the Star Wars movies because those have been, sagas. I mean, we had there's 3 trilogies that we've had 2, and we're on a 3rd trilogy right now. And this was a self-contained story. It's Rogue One, a Star Wars story. It has a start and it has a finish. And when we all first heard about Rogue One and the we would see 2 concept arts of like AT-AT walkers and like rebels and stuff. When we first saw that and we heard that it was about the group of rebels that stole the Death Star plans, and the reason that Princess Leia had them in the first place. The first thing that came to mind was like, oh, so this is about a bunch of people that die. This is like a suicide mission. And then you start seeing the casting and the big names that they have, and you're like, whoa, I wonder how they're going to handle this. And then Forrest Whitaker dies, like, as soon as he's on screen, which was a bit of a surprise because, he was I would say the second biggest name, next to Felicity Jones, on this cast list. And, there was, some of his voice lines from the trailers that we didn't, hear in the movie. And there was also, of course, some footage from the trailers that we saw, that weren't in the movie, which is the same that we saw in Force Awakens. People are like, oh, reshoots. Guess what? Donald Trump wasn't in this movie, so a lot of people going crazy about reshoots. It's like that every movie does that. They felt that it wasn't perfect the way that it was. They weren't happy with it, so they did some reshoots. That's what pretty much every single movie ever does. So that's what they did. And I don't feel like, unlike, say, Fantastic Four, it was very obvious when the reshoots were, not just because of like bad wigs or anything, but changes in the pacing of the movie and sometimes the tone and how the story was structured. So Rogue One didn't suffer from any changes that they would have had. I have no idea what was reshoots and what wasn't, and that's the sign of a movie that was, done fairly well. And it was done fairly well by Gareth and the team. It was a good eclectic group of actors, diverse, which is very important to a lot of people, especially when it comes to like the history of the Star Wars universe, especially the original trilogy, where it's mostly just white men. Princess Leia was the only woman of consequence outside of Mon Mothma, who was a shout out to the prequels because the woman playing Mon Mothma here actually played Mon Mothma in the prequels, but her scenes were cut. So there's a tie-in to the prequels, as well as Bail Organa making his appearance, Mr. Jimmy Spitz. And, we knew that he would be, in that position of power in the Alliance, and that he would have to go back to Alderaan so that he can die when the Death Star blows it up, hours after Rogue One happens, when Princess Leia gets captured in her Corellian starship. So there were certain things that we knew had to happen in this movie, how things had to set up, and it only made sense that everybody died. It was once Forrest Whitaker died, it was like, all right, so it looks like they're going to be going that way. And fairly early on in the final climactic battle there, before K2SO, which was great, Alan Tudyk, great job. Kind of playing the C3PO role in throwing out statistics, but in a more blunt manner. Less worried. He's a combat droid. So, you would have that kind of more of a offensive sort of mentality. And that was really good. Comic relief, but not being out of place with the other. If there was a human acting that way, it would have been a little bit out of place. But because of his programming and the way he said things as a robot made perfect sense, and it was funny. Also, putting the bag over the blonde guy's head, that was really funny. And then there were some, funny moments, not, a bunch of laughs like Force Awakens has, and of course a lot of people are angry when a movie isn't just chock full of jokes and is Guardians of the Galaxy. Not every movie has to be that. And I'm glad they went with this direction where it had some funny moments, it had some really cool moments, it had dark moments when we saw Cassius shoot the guy at the beginning of the movie, because, this is Rebel Alliance, they mention in the movie that they've done some bad things, some things they aren't proud about, in the name of the Rebel Alliance for the greater good. And what he did there was necessary. He had to kill the guy, otherwise the guy would have blabbed. He would have, turned on him in. Who knows what kind of info that dude did have. Yes, it was morally wrong, but he made the right choice for the greater good. You can make your judgments on that. And of course, he didn't take the sniper shots on Jin's dad there. Although I think that's they didn't really show what was going on mentally with him. Like he could have said something to himself to kind of more or so justify why he didn't take the shot. But it's fine that they didn't, because we could have filled the blanks within ourselves. A lot of people hate it when a script spoon feeds the audience about what a character is feeling or how a story is progressing. And I felt that was fine. But I think the characters, for the most part, were pretty good. Some people will say that a lot of characters weren't established enough. There wasn't enough backstory. I felt like, most of the characters were handled fairly well, considering there was only one movie to do it. Jin's character obviously was done well. We had, the blind guy who is, I'm one with the Force was me. A protector of the Jedi Temple and the Jedi Order. That makes absolute sense. There will still be some remnants of that methodology out there. And clearly, he's not trained in the Force. He's Force sensitive, obviously. He's not so young that he would have been born a Jedi and not being able to train. So he would have been 10 or in his early teens when the Jedi were wiped out. And, this is where he is now. So he never received training, maybe because he was blind at a young age, or we don't know what his backstory is, but the kind of relationship that he had, with his guardian, his protector, I thought that was handled perfectly in the amount of screen time that they had to do it, as well as the impact that they had. We had the TIE fighter, or I guess he was a cargo ship, pilot, defector from the Empire. Maybe some people are angry that he didn't get more of an interest in why he defected and yada yada yada, but I don't feel like that was absolutely necessary. I felt like Cassian, Diego Luna's character, wasn't fledged out maybe as much as he should have been, but that's not something that you can really, bag on the movie for too much because of what it had to do and what it had established, and not, draw the focus too much away from our main heroine here in Jyn Erso. And the fact that they all died was inevitable. It was something that had to be done because, they aren't in A New Hope or Empire or Jedi, and it kind of gives the movie a little bit more impact in the Rebel Alliance as a whole, as a sacrificial sort of thing, doing something for the greater good. You're not going to get a medal at the end of this, and a huge ceremony where everybody claps, or you're not going to, get married and, have the happy ending. And you aren't going to see the end of the war, but that you took a sacrificial, integral step to do what needs to be done for the good of the galaxy. And that's what we saw. and it was fairly obvious early in the climactic battle that they were all going to die before they killed off K2SO or the Imperial pilot. Once it was said that they need to get a connection out there, I was like, all right, this is the part where everybody sacrifices themselves little by little to get this one thing done. And that's what they did. And that was, I think, the best way to approach it. I felt like each death wasn't too over the top, but at the same time, meaningful. They all had a part to play. They all knew that there was very little chance they were getting out of this alive. They weren't going to be able to sneak in and sneak out at the same time when they had to do what they had to do. But at the same time, it was absolutely vital that they did what they did. And with this, when we first heard that, Jyn Erso's dad is going to be an important character in this movie, and that, he, worked on the Death Star, it made us, I think, probably the majority of us wonder, all right, is this how they're going to explain the exhaust port and shooting the torpedoes through the ventilation shaft, as a crippling, obvious weakness to the Death Star? That's kind of like a joke that a lot of people have made about A New Hope. And this kind of, in a sense, futuristically, retroactively, it does explain that. And I'm sure not a lot of people are going to be 100% satisfied, but it's good world building. I felt like this movie did a good job with the world building, especially when it comes to how things were between the fall of the Jedi in Revenge of the Sith and the rise of the Rebel Alliance in A New Hope, about how things were handled. It looks like on Jeddah, that was the last Jedi temple. They're getting the Kyber crystals. And that plays a big importance. It makes people, I feel like, view A New Hope, like some of the earlier scenes on the Death Star, was a little different. Like, your Imperial fleet, they may be trouble for you, but, this is the most powerful weapon in the galaxy. And, the way that Vader said that, the Death Star is nothing compared to the power of the Force. And it's kind of funny because the Death Star is super powerful with the Kyber crystals, which are used for lightsabers, which are only used by Force wielders. So there's a very good job of tying things in to each other, which some people will call, shameless fan service or whatever. But I think it's good world building. It's a Star Wars. You have to make it make sense and have everything tie in. Getting to see Vader go off on people at the end was super cool. I know people were hoping for more Vader, but I feel like that might have detracted away from both our main protagonist and our central antagonist in this film. Although, of course, he would have had a role to play, much like Grand Moff Tarkin, in that, he's super important to the Empire. Leia says that he's on Tarkin's leash, but we kind of got to see him go off that leash. He was all by himself, taking on all those lasers from those rebel soldiers, throwing that dude up to the ceiling. That was awesome. And then pulling all the guns back and then pushing him away. That was like some Force Unleashed shit right there. But I think, like, the coolest moment of the movie, kind of like in Force Awakens, where it was Poe just killing like 9 TIEs in like 5 seconds, which was like amazing because we have context for how cool that is when the squid dude, I don't know, I forget what his name was, but the guy who was preceded by General Akbar, when he had that cruise ship hit the disabled Star Destroyer that was disabled via the ion torpedoes and crashed it into the other Star Destroyer to like cut it in half. That was the coolest thing in the movie. I thought that was super duper nice. The action was great. It was definitely more of a war movie. And definitely, I think, notable for the kind of struggle we got to see. The fractured, former rebel fighters. The Forrest Whitaker's character that raised Jyn in his more guerrilla tactics. Seems like a more of a guerrilla rebel force in the way that they handled things. Taking out that tank and all those stormtroopers. So we kind of got to see, a bit of the darker side of not like just the universe or just a different change in tone, but about the struggle of the rebels and what they had to go through and how people felt differently within a group of people that had one central goal they definitely differed on how they wanted to handle things, which is why Forrest Whitaker's characters splintered off and kind of did his own thing, why there wasn't a consensus to go fight together, and why Cassian had, to get his boys behind them to help them go and get the Death Star files. And of course, at that point in time is when a lot of the rebels realizing this was their shot, that it was absolutely necessary. They said that there was no turning back at this point, that they had to fight, and they kind of almost laid it all on the line right there. So that part I thought was great. It was cinematic, it was world building, and it paid tribute to A New Hope and to Empire with a lot of the retro future aesthetics and the facial hair of the pilots. And just keeping things, it felt like a Star Wars movie, even though we didn't have any returning characters outside of Mon Mothma, who had deleted scenes, and 3PO and R2 had a tiny little scene where they never tell me anything. So I think they did a really good job at doing that. It felt like a Star Wars movie, but at the same time was different in tone, in how the action played out. Darth Vader was the only lightsaber wielding dude in the entire time, is the only time you saw the Force. Sure, we had a Force sensitive guy who was dodging lasers, but limited in what he could do because he wasn't trained, didn't have a lightsaber, and he was blind. Not that it's hurt other blind Jedis that we might know from the extended universe that's no longer canon, but I still think that the same rules would apply here. So I really enjoyed the movie. Like I said, it has some drawbacks, maybe with some character development, or some things was that was lucky that the Star Destroyer just happened to land, point down first to taking out the shield, or some little coincidence like that. Some cinematic choices. Maybe people I don't like too much special effects, I don't like too much explosions, but it felt like a war. This was the Normandy of the Star Wars universe when it came to the importance of the battle, the uphill nature of the battle, and the turning point that it eventually was, and the fact that they were on a beach, storming that beach, as a kind of maybe a nod to old warfare as well. But I thought it was pretty good. Maybe the writing wasn't perfect or as impactful as previous Star Wars movies. Maybe because of these characters are contained within one story, people won't have as much attachment to them. But I felt like they did a good job of not forcing camaraderie, just really phony shit like you would see in Suicide Squad or other movies oh, we're a family now magically. There was a trust earning between Jyn and Cassian, and at the end they just kind of had a moment where they accepted their fate. They knew that they succeeded in what they had to do, but they just they knew that they were about to die, and there wasn't a forced romance or anything like that. There wasn't some cheesy line. It was a really beautiful scene at the end when they just watched the shockwave come and envelop and kill everybody there, and they knew that they made the right sacrifice, and that's a different story than what we've seen in the Star Wars universe. So I think it did a good job at all the important points that the movie needed to be. It didn't surprise us, I feel in many aspects, and you may say that's good or bad. The trailers, for instance, showed us exactly what kind of movie that this would be, and we weren't maybe blown away by something, but the story that it set out to be, I felt like it was successful in telling that story, in being different, but still being a cohesive part of the integral storyline of the original trilogy. And I felt like it's a great compliment to Star Wars as a whole. So yeah, I liked it. Movie of the year? No. Best Star Wars movie? No. But a really good movie, a really good Star Wars movie, and a great step in the right direction. I feel like, with 2 home runs, I feel now, from Disney's handling of Star Wars, there's no reason to feel bad about any future prospects coming from Star Wars thus forward. Maybe there's a misstep somewhere, but there's really no reason to think that with what Kathleen Kennedy and the team has done over there, heading up Star Wars on Disney, and they're getting the right people involved. Maybe this one isn't going to be as iconic as some of the other things, but it didn't need to be, and maybe that's not what it set out to be. But it was a good film, and good for Star Wars as a whole. Those are just my thoughts. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Super looking forward to episode 8 next year. That'll be my most anticipated movie. This was my most anticipated movie of this year because of what The Force Awakens was, even though we didn't know anything about this movie, a year ago outside of a few concept art pieces. It was just the fact that we see what direction Star Wars has been heading. It made everybody excited to see this one, and I feel like most people are going to be pretty happy with what they saw.